So lately my content was a bit tank heavy, so I thought I'd end the year with some heavy tanks, namely the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Ausführung E and B, better known as the Tiger and Königstiger. There are quite many debates about these tanks, thus today we are gonna look if these tanks were actually combat effective beasts or just mere kittens. So how do you define effective in this case? Well, Christopher Wilbeck, who wrote a thesis on the effectiveness of the Tiger, notes the following. German doctrine placed great emphasis upon the heavy tank's destruction of opposing tanks in both the offense and the defense. Because of this emphasis, the heavy tank battalion's effectiveness is partly measured throughout the study as the tank kill-loss ratio they produced. Additionally, he also adds that a simple kill-death ratio might not be enough and notes that because these circumstances may have precluded a tank-to-tank battle, a simple ratio of kills to losses does not completely define effectiveness. Therefore, a secondary measure of effectiveness used is that of mission accomplishment, or in other words, whether the battalions accomplish their assigned missions. Of course, as many of you know, kill-to-loss ratio outside of computer games are very complicated issues. Not only due to the problem of the definition what actually constitutes a loss, yet also due to the issue that a lot of over-reporting was happening in terms of kill claims. So now for losses, we go with a total loss of a Tiger, which means it could not be put in service again due to excessive damage or loss to the enemy. This also means we have two loss numbers, the combat losses and the overall losses. For instance, tanks that had to be abandoned were blown up by the crews, yet were not destroyed in combat. In terms of kill claims, Wilbeck looked at the data provided by the Germans on the Western Front and confirmed most data with detailed unit histories of the Western Allies. Tank kills reported by the heavy tank battalions against the British and US were verified in specific engagements from a variety of records, including unit histories, after-action reports, diaries, and other personal accounts. Not surprisingly, so tank losses were often omitted in the unit histories and in personal accounts, making an accurate count much more difficult to obtain. As such, the problem is that for the Eastern Front, the source situation is rather bad. Sadly, Wilbeck does not mention how accurate the kill claims were on the Western Front. Yet he notes about the correctness of the Western Front loss data. Given the credibility of German reporting in the West, there is no reason to doubt the veracity of German Tiger losses in the East. Caution must be exercised, however, in assessing the number of tanks operational. Now, why the caution about the number of operational tanks? Well, this number might be wrong, since there was a practice among German Panzer divisions to underreport the operational strength by around 15 to 20% to prevent high command to pull away Panzers for use elsewhere. Yet for the actual losses of the Tigers, this likely had little effect, since the accounting for Tigers was thorough. An unserviceable Tiger tank required the unit to make a report identifying the chassis number and survey of the damage, and an estimate of the time needed for repairs. A second report was made at a higher level, indicating the number of tanks in working order for the unit and the number of tanks under repair. Sadly, for some King-type units, the unit war diaries were lost and or captured. So as always, take everything with a grain of salt, yet the source situation is way better than in many other situations, for instance tank production costs, something I discussed on my second channel a bit more thoroughly. Of course, the kill to loss ratio are not for individual Tiger tanks, since war is a team effort. In case of the Tigers and King Tigers, the primary form of organization was the heavy tank battalion, schwere Panzerabteilung, each of which had an authorized rank of 45 Tigers or King Tigers. Although rarely all 45 were operational at the same time, and in one case a battalion never received the full complement of 45 Tigers. In total there were 14 heavy tank battalions, of which 10 were independent. 3 were attached permanently to one Panzer Corps each, and 1 was permanently attached to an elite army division. Since we got this flank covered, let's now look at the kill to loss ratio for each heavy tank battalion. For this we look at the combat losses first, and then the kill numbers. Additionally, to get the bigger picture, we also look at the total losses. As such, we can derive the kill to loss ratio in combat and in overall. First off, here are the combat losses for each battalion. Note that in some cases the cause of loss is unknown. Anyway, the highest amount of combat losses were for the 503rd. In overall, the average combat loss ratio was around 45%. As such, less than half of all Tigers were lost in combat, assuming that the unknown losses were not combat losses. Second, here are the total losses of each battalion. First, note that the lowest number was for the 103rd, yet this unit never received the full complement of the authorized 45 King Tigers. Then again, the 503rd had the most amount of losses and lost more than 5 times the authorized strength of 45 Tigers per battalion. This of course is due to the fact that it was one of the first 3 heavy tank battalions and saw extensive action over the course of the war. This is backed up when we look at the kill numbers. Here again, the 503rd has the highest number, followed by the 502nd, which both scored more than 1000 kills. The lowest number of kills are for the 508th Battalion. So let's look now at the combat to loss ratio. As you can see, the 103rd stands out clearly. Considering the circumstances and the high discrepancy to the other units, this number is very likely wrong. Wilbeck notes the following. Its records are incomplete and cannot be verified. It is difficult to imagine how the battalion destroyed more than 500 Soviet tanks in a little over 3 months of combat. Now Wilbeck did not remove the 103rd from the list, whereas I added an additional line of data without considering the 103rd. As such, the highest kill to loss ratio is around 19 tanks for each Tiger lost. Now if we look at the 13 battalions that have regular numbers, 6 of them managed to score a kill to loss ratio higher than 10 tanks per Tiger. On average, including the 103rd, Wilbeck notes for each Tiger 12.06 enemy tanks were destroyed, whereas without the 103rd it's 11.52. Of course, if we take into account the non-combat losses, the situation changes quite dramatically. And in this case, the 502nd seems to be the overall winner by a wide margin. Whereas every other unit had less than 10 kills per Tiger lost, the 502nd managed 13.08 against the average of around 5.25 enemy tanks per Tiger lost. As such, the 502nd has a higher overall kill to loss ratio than the average combat kill to death ratio. But let's look at the overall picture again. Wilbeck concludes the following. Even though results differ greatly from battalion to battalion, when taken as an overall average, heavy tank battalions were undeniably effective at destroying enemy tanks. As mentioned before, Wilbeck also outlined a second criterion, namely mission accomplishment. This is rather hard to measure for several reasons. First, originally the Tiger was intended as a breakthrough tank, yet it rarely saw offensive missions. Second, the Tiger units were often assigned very hard to impossible missions over the course of the war. Also, there is no statistical data on mission evaluations. As such, the answer was addressed indirectly by Wilbeck. He notes that the emphasis given by the Allies in various ways towards the Tiger and the heavy tank battalions shows that it was an effective weapon. For instance, the Allied intelligence estimate of German forces in the West prior to D-Day shows that the heavy tank battalions were the only units below divisional size that the Allies posted on their theater intelligence map. Now for those who don't know, after battalion comes the regiment and then comes the brigade and only then comes the division. So to put this a bit in perspective. Similarly, Allied forces usually tried to bypass Tiger units. From the published histories of both Allied and Axis forces, very few Allied tankers willingly engaged in direct combat with a Tiger or King Tiger. If there were other options, such as bypassing their positions or employing artillery or tactical aircraft against the Tigers, these options were used first. As such, he concludes that the Tiger units were effective, else the Allies would not have allocated so many resources against them. It should be noted that Wilbeck looked mainly at the tactical effectiveness, which is stated in his book. If one goes to the operational and especially strategic level, the situation is quite different. If we look beyond the tactical aspect, the Tiger was a very expensive piece of equipment, not just in production time and resources, but also logistically. The amount of fuel necessary and additional work for making it suitable for railway transport, including special carriages that could move the tank, and many other aspects. As such, some authors argue that it might have been useful to build more Panzer IVs, Stucks, or even Panthers instead of the Tiger. If one could argue, why stop here? After all, Germany was on the offensive. The German military historian Markus Pöhlmann noted a very interesting memo that was written during the war by a German artillery general. In this memorandum, Fritz Brandt, general of the artillery, firstly stated that the Wehrmacht had been in transition to an artillery material battle since the middle of 1943. All efforts had to be directed towards this. All projects of over-armament, such as tanks or close air support planes, were to be liquidated. This memorandum included an infographics that suggested that the amount of steel needed for one Tiger could actually produce 21 artillery pieces, namely the Feldhaubitze 18 with 105 mm, which was the standard German artillery piece for World War II. Yet going down this route now would open up a whole new can of worms. So let's get back to our big cats, because what I found most interesting in Wilbeck's book is the following. According to him, the heavy tank battalions and such the Tiger and the King Tiger were often not used according to doctrine, and that he identified various points where they were used ineffectively. The first aspect was that in many cases there were not enough support troops, and as such too much weight was placed on the Tigers alone. Probably the most glaring example for this was the use of Tigers against minefields. Although non-doctrinal and accepted and supposedly preferred method in many instances was to bull through the minefield with Tigers. This saved personnel from having to expose themselves, but was costly in terms of maintaining a high operational rate for Tigers. The second major issue was that the Tigers were often used in piecemeal fashion during offensive operations, thus contradicting the general principle of concentration as outlined in doctrine, and hence severely limiting the impact of Tigers. Of course, in some cases this was due to overall lack of Tigers. This is at first contrary to the third point, because according to Wilbeck, the Tiger was most effective in the defense when it was dispersed along a wide frontage. This was due to several reasons. As pointed out, the Allies generally tried to avoid Tiger formations, and considering the limited amount of mobility and reliability of the Tigers, this could result in their loss outside of combat. Additionally, if Tigers were dispersed, this would reduce their travel distance, which could increase their operational rates, since they were not transferred to one hotspot to another. Well, so the next time when you're in charge of a schwere Panzer battalion, you have at least a basic idea what to do. To conclude, despite the various shortcomings of both the Tiger and the King Tiger, on the tactical level the heavy tank battalions can be considered combat effective. Of course, the question must be asked at what price. Many authors note that the Tiger was famous or better infamous, yet it was too expensive, especially considering Germany's lack of resources. As such, it was likely not cost effective at all. Yet then again, one has to ask, what was the alternative, because just considering Panzer IV or Sturks might seem obvious, but maybe the artillery general was right after all, and Germany should just have spammed Feldhaubitzen and anti-tank guns all over Europe in 1943. Now, whatever you think of the Panzerkampfwagen 6, it really depends on the perspective, as Markus Pöhlmann illustrates very well. Context matters. The overlapping and interleaved suspension system, Schachtellaufwerk, patented by Ernst Kniekapp, promised superior running characteristics, but only in regions of the world where mud and snow did not freeze together in the cold season and thus block the drive. Now, if you like in-depth research content like this, consider supporting me on Patreon or alternatives linked in the description. Thank you here to Ralf Ratz from the Panzermuseum and Geschichte for providing bibliographical support. Special thanks to Wolfgang, Jack and Malte for sending me books that made this video possible. As always, sources are linked in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.